Hi there, boys and girls. Welcome to Storytime with Mr. Riddle. Today we're going to read the sad story called Gone Forever. It's an alphabet book about extinct animals. It's a little bit longer, but I'll try to read a little bit faster. It's written by Sandra and William Markle, illustrated by Philippe Davalos. You know that there were once dinosaurs on Earth, and that they are now gone. When there is no more of an animal, it's said to be extinct. This book is about animals that lived much more recently than dinosaurs. Some only became extinct while your grandparents or your parents were children, but once an animal is gone, there's no way to bring it back. You'll see this one later in the story. A. A is for auroch. Imagine cave paintings of these wild oxen come to life. It's no mistake that the ancient artists made them look huge. Aurochs were nearly as big as elephants and had splendid long horns. They were the great-grandparents of today's cattle. Once large herds roamed over what is now Europe and Asia, but they were hunted for food and to make trophies of their horns. When only a few were left, the aurochs were protected by guards, but hunters managed to raid this herd too. The last auroch died in 1627, leaving only the cave paintings as memories. Can you imagine large cattle as big as elephants? It's pretty big. B. B is for bear. Hunters didn't cause the Atlas bear to disappear. It was the desert. Remains have been found to show that these bears once roamed all over North Africa. That was when the region was covered by forests rich in fruit and nuts. Farmers wanting to plant crops and builders needing timber cut down the trees. Over time, the soil blew away and the land became a desert. After that, Atlas bears only lived in the forested Atlas Mountains of Morocco and in zoos. By the late 1800s, these bears were gone too. C. C is for Cisco. Before World War I, catching these fish was big business on lakes Michigan and Huron in North America. In summertime, fishermen in boats hauled in nets bulging with Ciscos. In winter, fishermen huddled in shacks, tugging the glistening Ciscos through holes cut in the ice. After many years of such heavy fishing, few Ciscos remained, and most of the fishermen quit. Over time, the number of Ciscos would have increased, but by then, sea lampreys had entered the lakes. These eel-like animals probably killed the last Ciscos. Not one of these fish has been seen since 1960. There's two different ones, the blackfin Cisco and the deepwater Cisco. D. D is for Dodo Bird. What a funny looking bird. It's fat and nearly as big as today's turkey. Its wings were too tiny for flight. Of course, since it lived on an island and had no enemies, the dodo did not need to fly. Then in the late 1500s, settlers arrived on Mauritius and Reunion Islands off the southeast coast of Africa, the dodo's homeland. They found the odd birds tasty and easy to catch. Rats from the ships also ate the birds' eggs. In less than 100 years, all of the dodos were gone. When the news reached Europe, people were shocked that it was possible to wipe out an entire group of animals so quickly. Pardon me. D is also for the Dodo Tree. It is possible that some plants need animals to survive. For years, people believed that no dodo trees could sprout. This tree's fruit had an extra thick seed coat which was thought to break down only as it passed through the dodo's digestive system. Today, scientists think Mauritius Islands' extinct parrots and fruit-eating bats may have been just as important to the dodo trees as the dodo birds. Of the few dodo tree saplings that still sprout each year, very few survive. The saplings have to compete with plants people introduced onto the island. Pigs and deer also eat the young saplings. So for many reasons, the dodo tree may one day become extinct, just like the dodo bird. The dodo tree and the dodo bird. E. E is for elephant bird. Imagine an egg so big that an empty shell could hold 2 gallons of milk. You know the big containers, the big gallon of milk? That's 2 of those. That's how big the elephant bird's eggs were. The elephant bird was a giant, about 3 meters, that's almost 10 feet tall, much taller than the tallest basketball player. Ancient hunters probably killed the elephant bird for food and ate its eggs, but it may have become extinct because the climate changed. Elephant bird remains have been found mainly in what was once wet, swampy land on Madagascar. It's an island off Africa, but today those swamps are dry land. A bird bigger than some of the tallest basketball players. F is for frog, the Palestinian painted frog. This frog's swampy home dried up too, but not because of a change in the weather. In the late 1940s, the Israelis drained the area around Hula Lake, just north of the Sea of Galilee, so that people could build homes. But that swampland was the home to the Palestinian painted frog. No longer than half a stick of butter, this little frog spent its days safely burrowed into the sandy swamp bottom, with just its head sticking out of the water. At night, it came out to hunt for bugs. Always rare, none have been seen since 1955. They drained the lake, so it doesn't have a home anymore. G. G is for the great auk. Does the great auk remind you of today's penguins? Unlike penguins, which live mainly in the far south, near the South Pole, the great auk lived in the far north. But like penguins, each year great auks came ashore and gathered in large groups to nest. People killed the adult auks for food and used their soft feathers to stuff mattresses. They stole their eggs too. When the great auks became rare in the mid-1800s, museums eager to mount displays offered a huge reward for hunters, and they quickly killed off the last few auks that remained. Well, the last few were put in a museum. They were stuffed and put in a museum to look at. That's kind of sad. H. H is for the Heath hen. Once springtime in New England was alive with the roar of hundreds of noisy male Heath hens attracting mates. But settlers hunted these birds and farmers chopped down their home forests. By 1830, Heath hens could only be found on Martha's Vineyard, an island off the coast of Massachusetts. There, protected by law, the heath hen population soared to almost 2,000. Then in 1916, a fire during nesting season killed all but 100 birds. A hard winter a few years later killed more. Then disease wiped out all but one. The last heath hen died in 1932. I is for Ibex, the Portuguese Ibex. A hunter had to be strong and clever to catch a Portuguese Ibex. This wild goat could run along narrow mountain ledges and bound up steep rocky slopes. But being hard to get only made its beautiful horns a more valuable trophy. Local villagers also hunted the Portuguese Ibex for food and to make medicine from the stone-like lumps that formed in its stomach. Once hunters had guns, it became easier to get these graceful animals. The more guns improved, the rarer the Portuguese Ibex became. The last known sighting was in 1892. You wouldn't want to be hunted for your horns, would you? That would be sad. J is for Jaguar, the Arizona Jaguar. An old Indian might have followed a trail of a jaguar's footprints to the deer remains the big cat had buried. Native Americans unable to hunt on their own sometimes found food this way, and the Arizona Jaguar had no trouble catching more. It was the top hunter in the range, which spread across the forested mountains of eastern Arizona and the southern half of the western New Mexico and southern California. Then settlers moved in and pushed the cat out of its homeland and hunted it for its beautiful skin. The last reported sighting of an Arizona jaguar was in New Mexico in 1905 by the hunters who had killed it. Again, they hunted him for his fur, his skin. K. K is for Kaka, the Norfolk Island Kaka. What a surprise to hear a dog barking in the treetops. That's what the first settlers of the Norfolk and Phillip Islands in the South Pacific thought, until they discovered what was making that sound. It was a colorful parrot called the Norfolk Island Kaka. It nested in hollow trees or in holes in the rocks, and mainly ate nectar, the sweet liquid made by flowers. Like the dodo, this island bird had never had to stay away from enemies until people arrived. It was very easy to catch, and most of the Norfolk Island Kakas were eaten. The only survivors were a few kept as pets. Long after the last wild birds were gone, one lived in a cage in London until 1851. Notice his curved beak for getting the nectar out of special flowers. L is for lion, the Barbary Lion. Barbary lions, which lived in North Africa, were much bigger than today's lions. The male was only a little shorter than some cars and had dark mane covering nearly half of its body. Like the Atlas bear, the lion suffered when the ancient farmers chopped down the trees. With the forest gone, the animals these cats hunted left or died off. Many Barbary lions were caught by the Romans to show at their sports arenas. Finally, like the Atlas bear, the Barbary lions only survived in the rugged forest of North Africa's Atlas Mountains. But better guns made it easier to hunt, even in such wild places. Hunters killed the last Barbary lions in the 1920s. Again, much bigger than today's lion, and he had a much bigger mane, much darker. M is for moa. Was this what moas really looked like? People think so, but the only clues they have to go on are bones, skin, and feathers. There are also stories that have been passed down by the Maoris, the native people who hunted these flightless birds in New Zealand and nearby islands. No one is sure just when moas became extinct, but the hunting stories date back to the mid-1800s. From the remains, scientists believe that there are a number of different types of moas, some nearly 4 meters. That's 12 feet tall. N is for the nukapua, the Oahu nukapua. People know that this small bird ate nectar collected from deep inside the tube-shaped flowers with its long curved beak. But that's all anyone really knows. The Oahu nukapua disappeared from its home island of Oahu in the Hawaiian Islands before anyone had studied it. No one is even sure why it became extinct. Maybe it was because the European settlers brought cattle that trampled the flowering undergrowth. Or maybe it caught a disease from the birds the settlers brought to the islands. Whatever happened, all of the Oahu nukapua were gone by the 1890s. O is for onager, the Syrian onager. Carvings on the walls at Nineveh, the capital city of ancient Assyria, show hunters lassoing 2 onagers from a thundering herd. Through the years, the desert people continued to hunt these small wild donkeys for food. But this didn't shrink the huge herds of onagers that roamed across the Hamad and Nafud desert. Then during World War I, armies overran the desert, and many Syrian onagers were shot or struck by trucks. The herds were broken up, and within a few years, these animals became scarce. Hunters killed the last wild Syrian onager but one lived on in the Vienna Zoo until 1927. Messing up a little bit, sorry about that. P is for pigeon, the passenger pigeon. Once passenger pigeons in search of food migrated across North America in flocks so big they blocked out the sun, like a big giant cloud. Nesting colonies often filled the treetops for miles. So many parents on guard kept the chicks safe from hawks and other animals. But such huge flocks also attracted the bird's worst enemy, human hunters. Thousands of passenger pigeons were shot in a day to send to the meat to market just for food. As the flocks shrank, the chicks became easy prey for other animal predators, and by 1910, only Martha, a female who lived at the Cincinnati Zoo in Ohio, was left. She died on September 1st, 1914. She was the last of the passenger pigeons. The Syrian onager, the passenger pigeon. Q is for quagga. Does that look like a zebra missing some of his stripes? The quagga was a close relative to today's zebras. The natives also called it Kaka, imitating its shrilling barking voice. In the 1600s, the Dutch who settled on the home range of Africa's Cape of Good Hope changed the name to Quagga. They also rounded up and killed as many of these grazing animals as they could catch. The Dutch wanted to save the grasslands for their own herds of cattle, and because of their exotic stripes and their coats, a few quagga were shipped to European zoos, but no effort was made to breed them, and the last quagga died in the Amsterdam Zoo in 1883. They didn't want the quagga eating all the grassland. They wanted to save it for their cattle. R is for rat. Imagine an island swarming with big rats. R-O-U-S's. Many longer than a man's foot. That's what an English sea captain named Maclear discovered in 1886. It was on Christmas Island, just 200 miles south of Java, in the South Pacific. But these were friendly rats that only ate fruit and tender plant shoots. The rats lived on undisturbed after the island's discovery, but then in 1906, a mining settlement was established. Within 3 years, all the Captain Maclear's rats were dead. Some had been killed by the vicious ship's rats that invaded the island. Many more, as believed, were killed by diseases the new rats had brought with them. These were friendly rats that only ate fruit and small tender grass. Remember, tender means soft. S is for the Steller's sea cow. When George Wilhelm Steller first saw these animals that were named for him, there were thousands of them in the icy waters around the Bering Sea and the Copper Islands in the North Pacific off Russia. He thought their rough, dark backs poking out of the water looked like overturned boats. Then several lifted their snouts, snorting mist and chomping seaweed with toothless, bony gums. The sea cows slowly crawled through the shallows and were as gentle as they looked. Hunters killed them so easily for their meat and thick fat, they were all gone in less than 30 years from the time that they were discovered. The last Steller sea cow was killed on Bering Island in 1767. These look a lot like manatees. We have manatees near the Everglades in Florida. But these are sea cows that lived up where it's icy and cold. T is for tortoise. The Rodriguez Greater Tortoise. Measure a line a meter, that's 3 feet, long, and you will just see how big this tortoise was. That's about, if you put your arms out, that's about how big the tortoise was. In the days of sailing ships, both French and English navies regularly stopped at Rodriguez Island in the Indian Ocean to pick up these tortoises to eat along their sea voyages. As the number of tortoises shrank, rules were set up to regulate how many each ship could take, but no one obeyed them. Then several shiploads of tortoises were sent to another island for protection, but so many died on the way that the tortoise population was even smaller than before. By 1795, the Rodriguez Greater Tortoise was gone forever. It's a big giant turtle. U is for the Utah Lake Scopin. In the 1930s, the 1930s were very dry in Utah. The level of Utah Lake dropped lower and lower. This lake was the only home for a kind of fish called the Utah Lake Scopin. As shallow parts of the lake dried up, the Scopin had fewer places to lay its eggs, and a small number of young fish that hatched were gobbled up by hungry, bigger fish, so few grew up to replace the dying adults. No Utah Lake Scopin has been seen since 1936. This was an animal that became extinct because of bad weather. It got so dry, the water level went down too low. V is for vole, the Gull Island vole. These meadow mice lived only on the Gull Islands off the east coast of Long Island, New York. Like other types of voles, they dig tunnels through the soft, moist soil to find seeds, bulbs, and tender plant shoots to eat. Then during the Spanish-American War, soldiers dug trenches and built walls over these islands to protect from possible attack. This destroyed the voles' homes, and many died. In 1898, when a researcher came to the island to study the voles, he couldn't find any. None have been seen since. Like a small mouse that burrows and digs little tunnels. W is for wolf, the Tasmanian wolf. This animal is called a wolf because it hunted other animals and looked a little like a wolf. But it was not a wolf. The female carried her newborn babies in a pouch, the same way as a kangaroo does. When European settlers came to the Tasmanian island off Australia and wild game became scarce, Tasmanian wolves began to hunt farm animals. The settlers then hunted the wolves. Too late. People tried to save the animals in 1966, and the government created a game reserve for the Tasmanian wolf in hopes that some might still be alive, but none have been seen since the last one died in Tasmania's Hobart Zoo in 1934. If you look online, you can probably find video footage of the last Tasmanian wolf at the zoo. I've seen it before. X. X is for the Xerxes blue butterfly. Imagine seeing a shimmering blue-violet butterfly fluttering over wildflowers. That was the brilliant color of the male Xerxes blue butterfly. The female was brown. They were always rare, and the Xerxes butterflies lived only in the San Francisco Peninsula of California. The cool foggy summers that seemed to suit them perfectly. Then people built on this land and cleared away the lupine and deerweed and other wildflowers that the females laid their eggs on. When the caterpillars hatched, they couldn't find enough food that they needed to grow and change into butterflies. The more buildings that there were, the rarer these butterflies became, and the last adults were collected in 1941. Some can still be seen today mounted in museums, but the brilliant blue color has now faded. People building houses destroyed where the flowers grew. Y is for the yellow bat, the Cuban yellow bat. All that is known about this bat comes from fossil remains found inside a cave near Dakari, Cuba. Experts guessed it must have been something like its relatives surviving in the Bahamas and in South America. They figure it has slender legs and funnel-shaped ears, but the fossils show it was much bigger and more heavily built. It's also a guess to assume that it became extinct in the late 1800s, but the cause has been almost certainly a loss of food. The Cuban yellow bat is thought to have been very picky, a picky eater, specializing in a certain kind of fruit. When the fruit trees were cleared away, the bats probably starved, even though other fruit was available. The Cuban yellow bat. Sorry, this is a long storybook, but we're at the end. Z. Z is for zebra, the Burchell's zebra. In the mid-1800s, wealthy Englishmen liked to have a pair of these beautiful black and white striped zebras pulling their carriages, but the wild herds that roamed South African grassland weren't appreciated. Once this animal's main enemy had been the lion, and then farmers moved onto the home range. They killed all the Burchell's zebras that they could catch, because these animals ate the grass needed for the herds of cattle. The last captive Burchell's zebras died in the London Zoo in 1910, many years after they were gone from the wild. They're brown, black, and white. Again, we saw these on the front cover. Notice the stripes. Brown, black, and white. A little different than today's zebras. Now that you know about a few of the many animals that are extinct, sadly, many more are in danger, you can help protect them. First, look for birds and butterflies and other wild animals living right around you, and find out what they need to survive. Be willing to share your neighborhood and its resources with them. Then think about animals living in other parts of the world the same way, as neighbors sharing the earth. Sometimes, a little less for people can become more for animals, and keep them from becoming gone forever. The end. Again, a sad story about animals that are extinct. I hope you enjoyed the story. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Sorry about my mess-ups. Whoops. I'll try to do better next time. See you tomorrow.